Why do some managers empower their teams while others make their teams miserable? I'm sure you will see your current boss and former bosses in what I'm about to share with you. Every single person in leadership has at one end of the spectrum where they trust others, and at the other end of the spectrum, they do not trust. They doubt others. I'm sorry if my writing is bad, but I think you can probably read it. So that is one spectrum. They trust others, particularly the people on their team. When they trust others on their team, or they doubt the other people on their team. This is sometimes where conversations about trust within the workplace end. This is only one aspect of it. The manager also, or leader, also has another aspect of trust, and that is they trust themselves, or they doubt themselves. So on one end of the spectrum, they really feel like they know what they're doing. They have a lot of trust, whether it's founded or not, right? So now you have four different basic types of managers. Let's talk about each of them, because I can guarantee in your life you've seen all four of them. And then you can decide which one you want to be. And maybe a little bit about which one you are. It might not make you happy, but it's good to evaluate where you sit currently to improve. So, first of all, those who trust themselves and doubt their team members or others are in a quadrant I like to call the quadrant of arrogance. Now, this quadrant is also one that you might call the quadrant of micromanagement. It's where, there is a dictation of outputs. There's command and control style leadership. The leader becomes a bottleneck, right? What this ends up in is a great deal of disengagement in employees. There's so much that happens because of this quadrant. I can't go all into it in one video, but there's a lot that happens in that quadrant because of those managers when they don't trust others, but they trust themselves. They set themselves up as the only person who can handle everything. Right? If you've heard managers say, "Oh, I have to do everything myself," they are one of these managers, arrogance managers. And we as leaders need to make sure that we are staying out of this quadrant. We hired smart people for a reason, right? All right, let's go on to the next quadrant. This is the one where the leader doubts themselves as well as doubting others. Now, you might think this creates a leader who's timid. It does not. Usually, leaders who doubt themselves don't come across as doubting themselves. They come out as very strong. But what it ends up in is paralysis. So this is the quadrant of paralysis. Why is it the quadrant of paralysis? If a leader does not trust themselves, yet they don't trust others, then they only have one thing to fall back on. That's the organization. And so they look for bureaucracy. This might also be called the quadrant of bureaucracy. I'm sure you've had the manager who, when you go to him to see if you can do something to get approval for something, they'd say, "Oh, I don't know if we have a policy about that, right? Let's go get a policy." These are the managers who are in the quadrant of paralysis. And as leaders, this is not a place to be either. It actually comes across very much like a micromanager, even though the source of that control is not the person themselves, it is the organization. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have rules, that you shouldn't have regulations. Those guidelines are very important, especially depending on different industries. However, if you are guided by rules and regulations and they seem restricting, you're probably in this type of environment. Maybe you've contributed to it, right? And knowing it is the first way to get rid of it. So let's talk about this area up here where the leader doubts themselves, but they trust others. This is the quadrant of dependence. Now, what does that mean? Basically, this is the quadrant of people pleasing. It's where there's chaos. I'm sure you've had these managers before. You'll go into a meeting and they will say one thing. They'll have one viewpoint. But then you'll be in a different meeting later with a different set of people in that meeting, and because of the audience, they change their tune. They don't have a solid base. They go here, there, and everywhere trying to please everyone. They're afraid that their team won't like them, and if their team doesn't like them, then their team's not going to perform. Now, it's true that your team, it's important to have your team like you, but for different reasons than just letting them get away with whatever they want to get away with, right? So what is the final quadrant? It's the quadrant of magic. This is the quadrant of empowerment. All right, and once again, my writing's horrible. I get that, but you can understand this. This is the quadrant of empowerment. This is where you want to be as a leader. This is where you want to be as a team member. This is where the magic happens. This is where, instead of down here where you push output and input to the process and measure it, someone must be in their seat a certain amount of time every day. Someone has to get a certain amount of widgets made in a day, right? This is the output area. We focus on output and input, and we become very concrete. A lot of managers think down here that they're strong, they're in control, right? It's an illusion. You don't have control. In fact, things are flying around along, and the wheels are about to come off the bus. You just don't know it yet, right? At its most extreme part, in the most extreme circumstances. Where you want to be is empowerment. We focus in empowerment on outcome and impact. It's the environment that you have hopefully been in, where you have a manager who looks at you and says, "What do you think we should do?" Some people think that makes a weak manager. It doesn't. It's a manager who understands that they have hired the smartest people that they possibly can, and they should get out of their way. This is where the magic happens. Now, that doesn't mean you sit in your back office and you don't do anything and you're lazy, right? That gets us over here to the dependence quadrant, right? It means that you work with your staff, with your employees, with your team members to come up with valid outcomes that you want. And then you move to the side and let them take control. If you look at it, in each of these quadrants, there's a certain amount of number of people that you're allowing to use their brains to be successful, right? Here it's you. You think you're the smartest, and so you're going for that one brain. You overrule everything, right? Here in paralysis, I would dare say there's not a brain at all. It's the organization, and everything is done with the lowest common denominator at heart. And so you get some really dumb rules, even though you haven't hired dumb people. Up here, you once again have one person. It might be a group of people. They're not working in unison, right? It's one person, but it's not you. It's your employee. They're the ones who have to push everything. That's not the place to be either. This quadrant of empowerment that requires trust, that requires confidence in those around you, is the only one where you are able to take advantage of the maximum power of everyone's brains. This is where everyone comes together and things happen. Now, does that mean everything's perfect? It does not. But this is where you want to be. And until you are there, your organization, your team will not be as strong and productive and successful as it could be. You will be leaving things on the table with every single one of these other quadrants. It's the only one to be in for success.